Welcome to Clapback with the Facts podcast, where we are providing you with the information you need to know about what's politically impacting Black women across the country. In a world filled with mis and disinformation, we provide you with the real. If you're a Black woman, representing Black women, or in the community with Black women, we are here to clap back and give you the facts.
All right. Hello. It is Holly Holiday with Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote. And I've decided this year, because so many things are happening. I mean, literally so many things are happening, that it would be important for me to take a few moments every now and again, not on a schedule, to just kind of come on live and talk about things that are happening in real time. So today we're going to be talking about the Congress. So what I won't be dealing with today is I won't be dealing with the crazy amount of executive orders that we've seen, especially in the past 2 weeks, although some of them are horrific, and I will be back soon to talk about them, and we'll be bringing up some of them on our regularly scheduled podcast, which, as you know, drops every Thursday. But today I'm going to really be digging into Congress. And why are we digging into Congress? Well, for one, we will be on a 2-week break. So after today's session will end, Congress will go on what is known as spring break. Very common, happens every year, nothing unusual about the break. But what is unusual is about the things that they have done up to the spring break time, and more importantly, the things that they have left undone. So a lot of it today is going to be about budget. I'm going to try to do a little bit of explainer, as well as kind of let you know where the lay of the land is, and give you some ideas of things that would be really helpful for you to think about expressing your advocacy on. So I'm going to get started with something that's near and dear to my heart, which is Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C.'s budget. So listen, you probably saw a few weeks back, I came on live again to kind of raise the flag about the continuing resolution. Unfortunately, the continuing resolution was towards the end of March. Congress needed to pass a continuing resolution in order to keep the government open. And you may remember, this is when we have been calling on particularly Leader Schumer in the Senate to not support cloture, which would give up the Democrats' right in the Senate to have a 2/3 majority and also limit their filibuster. So they gave that up. Of course, that meant instantly that the continuing resolution was passed. But one of the things that we were able to do in the meantime was to protect give a little bit of legal room to the protection. So in the original continuing resolution to keep the government operating, there was a provision that would have forced DC to cut its current, meaning right now, already happening, current fiscal year budget by $1 billion. By the way, this is not federal money. This is money primarily that is taxed by and paid for by the citizens of DC, by limiting how much it could spend of its own money to 2024 levels. Now, keep in mind, we already have passed a FY 2025 budget. But now, under what they were proposing, they were going to force DC to go back and spend at the same level that they had spent the year before, even though we are more than 6 months into the current year. Crazy time. So it is important to note here that the funds that we are talking about are not federal tax dollars, but rather funds that DC raises from its own residents and businesses. These funds specifically are used to fund things like schools, firefighters, child care providers, businesses, and many other services in the district. So listen, don't take it from me. Take it from Council Member Christina Henderson, who's an at-large council member who did a fantastic video on the DC budget. So we're going to show that now, and then we're going to come back to talk about where we are now with the DC budget.
Hi everyone, I'm at-large Councilmember Christina Henderson. I have the proud honor of representing the entire District of Columbia. I also chair the Committee on Health. You might have seen in the news this week, there's been a lot of focus on the district's budget because of an effort in Congress to force the District of Columbia to cut $1 billion in spending 6 months into the fiscal year. Now, I have been dealing with the DC budget for a very long time prior to being a council member. I also was a council staffer, so I've had some experience with this, but budgets, sometimes they can be complicated. And so I felt like perhaps we needed to do a little district budget 101, especially for folks who are confused why Congress is involved and what the impact of what they're asking us to do would be. So let's take a look. I'm not a teacher, but here's the whiteboard. So the biggest thing that we have to focus on is, first of all, how do we fund the district budget? What is it made up of? Because there are some people who are convinced that the District of Columbia is funded completely by the federal government, as though we are a quote unquote federal agency. We are not. If you take a look here, 55% of the district budget comes from local dollars. Local dollars. Only 25% of the district budget is coming from federal sources. And so what does that look like in terms of actual numbers? Local is $11.6 billion. $11.6 billion in local. Now, if you don't believe me that is local dollars, let's look at how we make up that local dollars. 38% is from income tax. 25% is from property tax. 13% is from sales tax. And then we have some additional other sources here. So, some of the questions that people have been asking is, what if the district is required to make this $1 billion cut? Where does the money go? Well, the money will actually just sit in our bank account because the District of Columbia will continue to collect income taxes. We will continue to collect property taxes, and we will certainly continue to collect sales taxes from folks who are coming to do business in the district and buy goods and services. But we won't actually be able to spend it on district services to help constituents and visitors who come here to the District of Columbia. And the impacts are devastating. 65% of the district budget is spent on 3 things: public safety, public education, and human services. Let me say that again. 65% of the district budget, public safety, public education, and human services. The mayor likes to say we thought these were joint priorities between ourselves and the federal government, but unfortunately, if this continuing resolution is allowed to pass without changes to the language to allow for the district to continue to spend at its current spending levels, we will have to cut in each of these 3 buckets in order to make the math work. There's no way for us to cut $1 billion in spending without touching public safety, without touching public education, and without touching human support services. And what's so sad about that is, once again, we're talking about local dollars that are just gonna sit. And so this is part 1 of DC Budget 101.
All right, so here's what I want to make sure that we get from this. Understand that, again, we're talking about our current budget. So these are funds that have already been allocated. So if there is a push and the bill is passed, because now what has happened is we took that provision out of the CR, but it was then pushed and passed by the Senate as a standalone. Now it's over in the House. So this last minute deal was cut to remove the provision to force DC to cut $1 billion out of its current budget. And the Senate passed a bipartisan standalone bill that would basically allow DC to continue operating under its under its current enacted FY25 budget and basically spend the funds the way we've already agreed to spend them. Now, in order for that to happen, though, so think about how crazy this is. In order for DC to spend the money that it's already started spending, number one, Number two, that has already been allocated. So the money is already in the account, not in the federal account, but in DC's own account. The government, the Congress, and specifically the House, needs to pass a bill to give it permission to do so. Now, you would think this would be easy. They've had the bill now over 2 weeks. It has not even come up. And so now, as we head into our 2-week spring break, we know it's going to be at least another 2 weeks. And that bill is still languishing in the House, which basically means that the bill's in limbo. And what's happening is it's crippling the ability of the district to plan for its own citizens. So now, in lieu of not having permission to spend its own money, the district is now trying to figure out what kinds of cuts it needs to make. And what is going to be cut if we have to deal with this? Well, some of the things that are going to be cut are unfortunately going to look like schools, healthcare. It could possibly impact district employment. I was at council yesterday speaking with council members, and they are looking at things like possibly having to do a district furlough, which means that district would only operate a certain number of days a week instead of all 5 days. Think about what this does to services when you can't access them during the normal amount of time that you're used to accessing them. Again, could deal with how we are supporting healthcare and, of course, schools. And in case you want to see a better breakdown of how the money is being spent in the district, follow Council Member Christina Henderson on Instagram, and you will see that she breaks down really in a great way how it is absolutely crazy. I see you, Meredith. Yes, it is absolutely crazy, but she breaks down basically all of the things that could be cut. So this is really a problem. It is a huge problem. And while the district and the more than 700,000 residents of the district, not to mention the business owners who operate in the district, kind of are caught in this limbo for some indefinite amount of period, guess what's happening? Congress is going on vacation. That's what's happening. Congress is going on vacation. Someone is asking, thank you, Meredith. I'm going to put your question up about, is this a pilot to see what they can do in other cities? Possibly. Now, DC is unique because it is not a state. So yes, shameless plug for DC statehood. Because DC is not a state, Congress has the ability to go in and basically micromanage and approve, disapprove, or, as you can see, cause chaos with a budget that has been passed by a duly elected mayor and city council elected by the citizens of DC. And basically they can say, yeah, we see what y'all did there, but no. And that then, and as you know, because DC is not a state, they have one congressional member who doesn't even get a vote. The most that she can do is vote in committee, but when it comes to an actual vote on the floor, our congressional member, or as they're known as delegate, doesn't even get a vote in the final say. So yes, why is this important? Because let's face it, the Republicans are using this tactic to leverage to leverage and to negotiate bad deals for the rest of the country. So they've put us in a position where people here, Congress, is having to choose between bad deals for the country and bad deals for DC. And here's the truth. They're writing bad deals for everybody. It's just a false choice. So we really need citizens to step up and bring attention to this, which is why I am here trying to provide information for you all. Now, here's the other truth. DC is about the more than 700 residents that live in DC, but it's also a huge stabilizer for the region. The region meaning Maryland, Virginia, even North Carolina, all the way up to the East Coast. what happens in DC absolutely impacts what happens in this region. And so again, that gives it even broader, it shows why it's an even bigger issue that it needs to be leveraged. Now, here is the gag, because I know that a lot of people have been confused about this. Not only is DC facing, the federal government has screwed, absolutely. The federal government has screwed us in a couple of ways, meaning DC. So not only are they playing with how we should be managing our current budget and requiring us to go into a situation where we can't pay our bills, can't pay our employees, can't cover our costs that we've already allocated for, while that money just sits in the bank. So the money is there, but we can't spend it. But at the same time, they have impacted through all of their erasure of federal contracts, federal agencies, firing and termination of federal employees, many of whom live right here in the District of Columbia, has had a dramatic also. So now we have the $1 billion in current revenue. Now let's talk about future revenue. There's another $1 billion at stake. Why? Because all of this craziness that they've been doing with the federal government has cost DC incline over the next 3 years of another $1 billion. So we were already looking at how we were going to be making up in DC additional revenue because of the crazy things that are happening. We'd already been impacted also on the revenue side. So now they're coming for us $1 billion on the spending side, and then another $1 billion in loss of revenue. Earlier this year, DC's financial officer reports that local revenues in DC are expected to decline by more than $1 billion over the next 3 years, largely due to federal layoffs that are steep enough to throw DC into a mild recession just from that. So just taking it over. So here's the silver lining, though. A little bit of a silver lining. If they fail to pass the bill in the House that will continue to allow DC to operate at current funding levels, what will happen? Because as Councilmember Henderson just told us, that money's just going to sit in the bank, which means that at the end of this very stressful period, we're actually going to end up with what? $1 billion surplus. So they take us through hell for us to end up with a surplus, and potentially that surplus may then be may help with offsetting the decline in revenue. But rather than allowing us, hey Deborah, rather than allowing us to just allowing DC residents to deal with and manage their own fiscal health, which by the way, they have done an excellent job of. They have a high bond rating. They are known as one of the most fiscally sound cities, responsible cities in the country, and yet Congress is mucking around with them. So here's the takeaways. 1, encourage your congressional members when they are home, and they will be as of tomorrow because they'll be on spring break, to pass the bill that allows for DC to maintain its current funding at its current levels for its current fiscal year. We need the DC budget bill to pass. That's a key takeaway. Ultimately, what we really need is we need for DC to become a state, but let's deal with the first things first, and we'll continue to push for the long things next. What else has Congress been up to? Well, today, that's right, today, they've also decided to muck around with our voting rights once again. And I call this is under the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or as I like to refer to it, how Congress solves problems that don't even frickin' exist. Well, what they are seeking to do is to conquer and battle the massive voter fraud that they believe has existed in the last election. And while I wish we could point to fraud as to why we have the situation we have now, the reality is that there is no evidence of any type of widespread voter fraud. And in particular, there is no evidence that people who are non-citizens have voted in any of our elections, not our local elections, not our national elections, not our state elections. This is what you would call fake news. So this is a problem that we don't even have, but yet Congress is spending an inordinate amount of time trying to solve a non-existent problem. So what would the SAVE Act do? The SAVE Act will require all American citizens that are registering to vote or updating their registration to present information that they are in fact citizens. For most Americans, this means that you would need to either present a passport or a birth certificate. And let's be clear, again, this is not even a problem. Here's the gag. Most states who have ID laws, and frankly, there's a large group of people, and I happen to be one of them, that thinks we shouldn't even have IDs as it relates to having to vote, that once you are registered, that your identity is verified at the time of registration, and you shouldn't be required to then keep an ID in order to vote, because as we know, most IDs in this country cost money. So by forcing us to have IDs, it pushes a tax on voters. However, I digress, because even if you had a driver's license, including the real ID driver's license, which they have now forced all of us to get, or even a military ID or a tribal ID, that is not enough to verify your citizenship. So those IDs would literally be rendered useless in terms of registering to vote. Essentially, this would mean that the responsibility to verify a person's eligibility to vote would be shifted from election officials and the government to us as citizens. We, instead of assuming our citizenship or understanding our citizenship based on our current ID, we would have to bring additional documentation to verify that we are in fact citizens. Again, nobody has put forth any widespread effort that we have immigrants or migrants trying to vote in our elections. That's not even happening. But yet, here we are. The reason that this is important is one, it puts undue pressure on people, on us as individuals, to prove our right to vote. And when we already have such low voter turnout, it continues to suppress our vote. That's what we really have, voter suppression. The second thing is that it would change the ability for us, it would upend some of our most popular voter registration tactics. So this would almost virtually eliminate the ability for us to register online. It would make it very difficult for us to register via the mail. And let's face it, if you are a nonprofit who's been engaged in voter registration, you can forget it, because you would have no ability to verify citizenship by third-party registration, because you simply would not have access to the information. So all of this is really a huge ploy to limit the amount of people who not only are voting, but again, suppressing eligible voters from being able to vote. And the more tactics they throw at us, the more it ensures, because this tends to impact progressive voters more than conservative voters. So what they're really doing is impacting our ability to elect people who represent us. And let's face it, if you are a non-white person like I happen to be, it's going to dramatically impact your community, who are less likely to have access to things like, a passport. So this is very important. Unfortunately, it will likely pass the House today. So please note that when the Congress comes back off vacation after having upended democracy, wreaked havoc with the DC budget, we're going to need to get to work and remind them of what they need to be doing to protect democracy. And then the last thing I want to deal with today, because this sometimes I think is a point of confusion, and we are at this inflection point right now, is the debt ceiling. So let's talk about U.S. debt. Well, quite simply, the Constitution grants Congress the sole authority to borrow on behalf of the United States. It is the executive branch responsibility to execute that borrowing. Now, the debt ceiling was created to set a limit on how much the Treasury, i.e., the executive branch, can borrow, and to ensure that we are only borrowing at a level in which we can honor our commitments. If our debt ceiling is does not meet the responsibility of the amount of debt held, then it means that the Treasury is not able to execute on those borrowers, which limits the Treasury's ability to pay our nation's bills on time. And just like in our own households, when we don't pay our bills on time, we suffer dramatic, and I can't even underemphasize this, dramatic credit debt. But why the hell do we care about that? Because it ain't our debt, it's the country's debt. Failure to not pay attention to this, though, could lead to default and literally have catastrophic consequences, not just on Americans, but on the global economy. Think about this. In 2011, Republicans led the Republicans' delay in addressing the debt ceiling led to the first ever downgrade and increased borrowing of about $1.3 billion. And it took us decades in order to right set our credit rating and improve our financial stability. So here we go again. Now, at the end of the day, raising the debt ceiling in and of itself is not really my sword I'm prepared to die on. But what I am prepared to die on is, why the hell are we raising it? So I want to show you this graphic to talk about because we raised the debt ceiling under Biden as well. So here I want to show you, why are we raising the debt ceiling? Well, under Biden, we raised the debt ceiling to help cover basically what amounted to the American Rescue Plan. Now, keep in mind, this allowed us to expand healthcare coverage. The American Rescue Plan allowed us to ensure that we were able to come out of COVID. So this helped to pay for things like COVID testing, COVID vaccines. It allowed us to create, and by the way, one of the few examples of the United States government closing an equity gap. When we started COVID, as you remember, under President Trump, we had a huge gap in the deaths per 1,000 that dramatically impacted Black people. But under Biden and the American Rescue Plan, literally within 2 months, that gap closed, meaning that there was virtually parity between the people who were dying from COVID, and that race was no longer a factor. Why? Because they used data and put out services that were distributed based on need. What a thought that we would do that. Well, what does Trump want to do? Well, what Trump wants to do with his money is basically create tax cuts for the wealthy. Who is wealthy? I'm not talking about the people who earn $1 million. I'm not even talking about the people who earn $50 million. I'm talking about those billionaires. You know who they are. Some of them are tech bros, as you've been seeing on the internet. Yeah, those people. So in order to give them more tax breaks, and not just continuing the current breaks, but even give them more, they want to reduce social service programs, which would then send our debt up to $8.4 trillion, forcing us to raise the debt ceiling. Now, again, the issue isn't just about raising the debt. The issue is about, why are we going into debt? And my point is, I don't want to go into debt to help give billionaires even more freaking money. I don't want to go into debt and sacrifice important programs. You can take that down now. Important programs that help to service and protect everyday Americans. I don't want veterans benefits to be cut and Medicaid to be cut. And Lord knows we don't need to close the Department of Education, all in the name of giving billionaires more money. That's ridiculous to me. So that's what Congress has been up to, basically wreaking havoc with the District of Columbia, looking for increased ways to take away our voting rights and wreaking havoc with our economy in order to pay billionaires. What can I say? They're on recess now, so for the next 2 weeks, nothing new from them. But boy, do we need to be fighting. And if they're home and you see them, let them know how you feel about the work they've been doing so far. That's me. I'm Holly Holiday. I'm the president of Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote. We'll be back with our normal Clapback, Get the Facts. Follow us everywhere you have your favorite podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll get more of this. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you for joining us here on Clapback Get the Facts podcast. We hope that you're leaving feeling more informed and ready to provide others with the facts. We would love to hear your biggest takeaways from this episode, so post the show on your Instagram story and tag us at Sisters Lead. Also, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, please leave a review so others can get some sense of the facts that we're providing. Finally, if you would like to learn more about local resources and other projects we're working on, go to sistersleadsistersvote.org.